So, to everybody that's on my panel, I have them introduce themselves in just a minute because we wanted you to know everybody that's here. My name is Larry. I pastor Kennesaw Family Life Church, and this is Heather's brainchild. I'll let her talk about it in just a minute, but this is Suicide Awareness Month, and we want to have a discussion around the topic of suicide from a bunch of different angles, because I think everybody in the room at some point or another has been touched by suicide in one way or another. Myself, I lost my brother to suicide years ago. And I think a lot of our stories are very similar. Whether you struggle with it or whether it's something that somebody you know struggles with, we're all touched by it in one way or another. And this panel, the idea of it is to help us to be able to communicate well around it, to have a better understanding, and to know how to help somebody that does struggle with it and what those steps are. So our panel comes from a very diverse background. We wanted to come from all different sides. Unfortunately, we had Lieutenant Polycarpio on the list who has not been able to make it, so we will go without a first responder, which is unfortunate, but I think we can cover it today. And there are some note cards back there, so if you do have some questions, I'm going to go back and look. If you put one in there, we'll get a chance to get to those questions in a little bit later. So
let everybody get some.
Yeah, they're back there. So if you have questions or anything, you can hand them out.
We're not supposed to start till 7:15 in the discussion, so.
Oh, well, we're okay. I'm 10 minutes early, but my plan is, see, this is what happens. My wife is telling me what I should be doing, which is probably pretty smart.
If you look at the program.
If you looked at the program, you would know that.
That would go into the assumption I actually looked at something. My plan was to have everybody introduce themselves, my wife, which is what I'm going to do.
That's actually part of the program.
Yeah.
I worked really hard on that program. Even made sure your name was spelled correctly.
You did make sure my name was spelled correctly. But you have Pastor David.
Because you told me.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with Heather. And the reason we're using microphones, I know it's a small room. We want you to be able to hear, but we're also recording this for some people that could not be here tonight. So we want to make sure that we have an opportunity for those that want to watch this later. Heather and I, for the past couple of years, Heather started a podcast a couple of years ago. Last year I came on and started helping her with it. It's called 412 Connections, and it's all around how mental health and every area of our life is connected, and how the connections in our life help us improve our mental health when we keep those connections healthy. So just want to let you know about that. Heather, why don't you share with us a little bit about your vision and why we're all here tonight.
So as he said, September is National Suicide Prevention Month. September 10th was actually World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day. It is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, especially as an attempt survivor. And the reason that I put this together is because more often than not, the only voice that you hear is the lost survivors. And while I respect that they have a story to tell, it's not the only one. I want people to understand what happens when you go to a therapist and you tell them, look, I'm really struggling right now. I'm experiencing suicidal thoughts. What happens? And we need to normalize the conversation. We added a pastor this year because I wanted a voice other than Larry's, but also because...
Hey, which is good. I mean, that's a respectful
We haven't
thing.
even made it 10 minutes in, and we've got Larry slander.
he
Yes.
started it. But the reason that we added the church is historically the church has had a very less than popular view of suicide and mental health and the way that people have been treated. And I speak from my own experience here. I have had issues with the church, including them trying to pray demons out of me. It's not as much fun as it sounds. And a lot of times people say that it's a sin. And so we asked Pastor David Black.
We all got the memo but you. So, you know.
I was like, is that the same Pastor David?
I asked y'all love. But we asked him to be a part of this, and I didn't realize it at the time that we asked him, but you actually have experience with trying to help further the conversation about mental health, which I thought was really cool. And then Dr. Chris sitting next to me is our sponsor. She likes me, the checks in the mail, but she's also a loss survivor. And again, that's an important piece, but there's so much more to that. So we're all gonna have more words like this.
Thank you, Heather. Dr. Chris, will you just share with us a little bit about who you are and your background? And
I am Dr. Chris Welch. I own Eaton Chiropractic. Our practice is over about 2 miles from here. We used to practice right next door. At the beginning of COVID, my brother died by suicide.
Thank you.
I learned that from Heather the last time we came and had this conversation. So when she told me she wanted to do this, again, I could not jump on the opportunity quickly enough to donate the space and try to raise a little bit more awareness. When my brother passed, my family and I decided that we would start a foundation. It's called the Upstream Foundation. And our concept was that we need to stop pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and figure out why they're falling in. And so this is something near and dear to my heart. And our community, our family lost another member of our family about a month ago to suicide as well. So that's my view.
all right, thank you, Chris. David, why don't you share a little bit about you?
Sure. As Heather said, my name is David Black. I pastor a church called Grace Church. It's near Town Center Mall. We currently meet in a tent because our building flooded, not because we don't like tents, but it's the tent that I pastor at the moment. My background, I've done 18 years of church ministry in various capacities as pastor, whether it be young adults, all the way up to those who are older. And as we all know, suicide and depression and mental health is not simply a one-generational issue. It's a people conversation. And so my wife and I did a lot of work in a socioeconomically depressed area in a small Rust Belt town in Ohio. That was a lot of my education on the job about being close to people who have lost individuals in death by suicide, various other instances of mental health. And so as a result, as Heather also said, maybe we'll get into this further, that in a church setting, when someone says, hey, my arm is broken or my gallbladder is not working, the standard answer is, well, I'll pray for you. But if you sit across from someone else and say, well, I'm not sure my mind is functioning correctly, that response is often crickets, or honestly, it's a crapshoot. So our church cares a lot about actually talking about the whole individual, as you'll hear more, hopefully from mind and body next to me. Our hope was to start and foster that conversation because we think the church needs to be in the middle of that conversation. So we held a mental health panel for our community last year. That's my story. I know Larry, that's how I'm here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Heather.
All right, Brandon.
My name is Braden Brown. My wife and I own Mind and Body Christian Health Group together, and what that is primary care, counseling, working together, and it's a Christian healthcare center. So that's the emphasis, the base of it. And then so we've had an opportunity to partner with a lot of patients, clients coming in over the years that have been in the midst of it, been in the midst of thinking about that act, been the other side of it, perhaps surviving, like Heather said, perhaps a family member, and they're coming in to grieve and cope and heal. So it's definitely something that's near and dear on our minds. And so we're here and happy to be just part of the conversation, to give that perspective of, if you're going in, or if you or a loved one is going in, and what can you expect, so I can at least try to speak to, maybe some of the emotional, behavioral, thought drivers of that, and then, I can butcher a little bit the neurobiology of it, but I've got my doctor that works with us here, who's also my mother-in-law, that can help me if I get stuck in the weeds on that part. So we literally will just work together and tag team and surround people and talk and say, okay, what we got going on here, let's make sure from all the angles and do the best that we can that way.
All right, awesome. So we're going to get into a time of just kind of question and answer. I've got some questions already pre-done, and then if you've got some, Jennifer, if you can collect any of those. We had a basket around, but if you can collect any of the questions that you might have, we'll bring those up as we go throughout tonight. Before we jump into that, you can go ahead and collect those. Heather, I want to talk about something. One of the things I learned from Heather, I've known Heather for what, 7 years now, 8 years?
I don't know.
It's been a while.
Right in there. It feels more like 50.
Feels more like 50. I'm a pastor. She comes to my church and never mind. So with this, we have a love.
If they're not dogging you, they don't like you.
I know, I got a love relationship here. So Heather, I want you, one of your biggest things that you've always taught me is around verbiage and around how we speak about suicide. So a lot of people will use the term committed suicide. I know that's a pet peeve of yours. I'd like you to share a little bit around the verbiage and why you don't like that phraseology. And let's start out with that before I jump into the questions today.
How many people do realize that suicide used to be a crime? That is where the verbiage of committed comes from. We don't talk about people committing cancer or COVID. So why are we using the word committed when someone is fighting a battle in their head that they can no longer see another way out and treating it like a crime? And I wish Lieutenant Polycarpio had been able to make it tonight, because a lot of times what happens when someone is in crisis, 911 gets called and the police are the first to show up. I have been handcuffed and put into the back of a police car because I was struggling with my mental health. That is why I don't like the term committed. The proper phraseology that has been shifting lately is to use the term death by suicide, because that is what happened. You are not dying because you want to die. You're dying because you can no longer live. Just like someone with cancer didn't decide, yeah, I don't really care anymore, I'm just going with the cancer one. We're not letting our mind win, it's just we don't see it in the way. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of wanted to put that out there first so that we kind of get that open. And I think it's a really important thing. I have a question that was for somebody that's going to be watching this video later, who had sent in a question before we got here. And I'm guessing probably Brandon, might be the one to answer this. But it says, I would really like to know about programs that are available for teens suffering and not just inpatient type treatments, as well as support and support groups for families. So basically it sounds like, what programs are available for teens who are struggling with the thoughts of suicide, and what support's out there for them and for families.
And specifically for teens, I'm glad Stephanie, you're here. What was the place for teens? Because I would always say it backwards. There was one for the 18 and above, and there was one for the lower. Southern Live Oaks Wellness, was that?
That's the adult one.
That was the adult one. I'm going to Google that when I'm not talking, because we do have a few in the area. What I will say is that the good thing is with that, and the way that it works, here's my suggestion on how to find it, right? There are different levels, and I think part of what I heard in there is like not just hospitalization, right? Yeah. So there's 4 levels to kind of the type of care when it comes to counseling, on average. So you've got what I do, which is sitting down with a counselor, which is just regular, good old-fashioned outpatient. Then there's a step up where it's called intensive outpatient, and what that is basically, like maybe 2 or 3 days a week, you're in a group. and you're with other people that are trying to better their lives in the same way that you are, right? And so that's the step up, because it's, like you're with other people. There might be a medical doctor that you're meeting with, might be different types of people depending on the program, but it's like, all right, I'm getting this more than just the once a week for an hour or 45 minutes. I'm getting lots of doses. And then you kick it up just a little bit more to partial hospitalization. And then you can be there more like a 9 to 5 type of thing, where you check in the morning and then going all the way up to there. Now, in my searches, what I have found, because we have people that'll come and speak, and then, tell us a little bit about their programs and things like that. And what I have noticed, and what I would, caution anyone that wants to do that, is if you search those terms, things will come up very easily, and it's going to be very apparent what kind of experience you might expect there, right? Because there's 2 poles that I tend to see. There's a pole where there's really just kind of like they're there for the insurance, and you'll see like the 1.2 Google stars and things like that. There's these other places that are like 4.8, 4.9, 500, and 600, 700, and that's because they care. So what I'm going to do in just a moment, while other people get that, I'm going to see if I can find at least that one specific name of the place that we refer to most often, but I always get them reversed in my head, so I can check that out.
Okay. Awesome, thank you. And I turned that up and I talk loud, so I will turn mine down in just a second. David, with the church, do you guys specifically, or do you know of anything church related that is around support for those that are struggling with suicide? Do you know of any groups, anything like that?
I don't, not off the top of my head. In our church, we do endeavor to widen the circle around families specifically who might have teens who's struggling with depression or have considered taking their life. We have experience with that as a church body, and so a lot of that is just trying to say, how can we care for those who are caring for them? And then honestly, our go-to, because we're really early in the process of this conversation as a church body, is people like Brandon. We partner with LPCs all the time. And honestly, one of the largest things we can do as a church initially is take some of the financial burden off. And so we create a program that's an on-ramp for families or for individuals who are exploring options, whether they be outpatient or inpatient, and saying, all right, in the same way that we would say, how could we help with a need that might be more commonly thought about approaching the church with, whether that be groceries or something else, just saying we want to be able to help take that hurdle off the table. So I don't think that answers your question fully, but that's where we are right now.
Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
For support groups, I would recommend reaching out to NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Health. There's a Georgia chapter. There's also a specific Cobb chapter, and they can provide you support group information. There's also, I can't believe I'm going to say this, the GCAL, the Georgia Crisis Access Line, which isn't only for like a crisis, but you can actually reach out to them and they can give you resources. I don't have anything for specifically adolescents because it's been a few years.
Yeah.
I actually want to hit in on this one because I've got 2 adolescents. I've got an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old. And what we have done, because we had to find some help when you've got 2 suicides in your family close within a couple of years, you start looking. And what I've really found is if it's on their phone, they'll do it. And there's some actually really great programs that are out there. One of them is called Tap Outs. And it is basically online Zoom support. And they're not teaching the kids anything other than different tools on how to address different things. It's obviously not for somebody who is in crisis and ready to take their own life. It is, I'm all about prevention, right? And so it's, I think everybody else here is too. But finding those tools, Better Health is a good one. So there's a lot that are popping up, and you start putting those in your Instagram and in your Facebook, the algorithm will take care of you. It will absolutely take care of you, and things will start showing up. So that's really where I see mental health going more than anything, because what I see in my office is people come in, I need a therapist, I need help. I can't find anybody to refer them to. My husband's actually taking my daughter right now all the way to Roswell. And she's going to Roswell, and she's got an amazing therapist over there, but her therapist, who she prefers one-on-one in person. Her therapist is moving to Conyers, and I will be driving her to Conyers twice a month and doing twice a month Zoom. But we can afford to do those things. A lot of people can't afford to do those things. So that's where our churches are going to come in. That's where Zoom, I think that's been the blessing in COVID, is the ability to really reach out and find that therapist, but really getting them in those support groups first. And they're really starting to put them out there, and there's some good groups. So yeah, just to hop into the algorithm, it'll find its way to you.
You said something really good there, because we're on the topic of teenagers, and with that, we'll get into how do you support different people, and I think preventative is a big deal. Many of you know that a lot of your insurance companies will pay for therapists now. It's kind of hit and miss. And that's one of the things, and I'm proud to hear that Grace Church is stepping up to help support those financially, because that is a big burden. Like, where do we go? How can we help support? And I think that's where we in the community can step up as well in providing those support connections to somebody. You may not be the person that can sit down with somebody and know how to listen to be able to do that, but you could maybe financially help get them to somebody that can. And that's a pretty big deal, because that's where a lot of people feel lost, especially parents that know that their kids are struggling and they're like, well, what do I do? How do I help? And you look at the bill and look, as much as it's expensive, they got bills to pay, they've got insurance to cover. So the therapists are doing the best they can to make that happen. It's a tough deal. Well, I did have, and I think this is a good transition here. This came from somebody in the audience, and I think it goes back, and I think it hits the church pretty big. What would you say to someone who thinks suicide is selfish? Because that does come around a lot. So does anybody on the panel want to jump in on that and talk about that a little bit?
I'll say.
Go ahead.
I don't think it's selfish. I think it is they've lost their hope and there's just no other way. I think that the stigma is really starting to change a lot. I think we are starting to have more conversations because people like Heather and Larry are bringing these conversations to our communities and doing great things like taping these so we can share them and get them out. So it's not selfish. And if we can reframe it as it's just a loss of hope. And what can we as a community do to build people up, to give them more hope and let them see that there are people surrounding them. Was that too simple? Yeah, it's too simple. Not to get yelled at.
I'm gonna get yelled at yet. Some of the common phraseology when you hear people talking about suicide is it's a selfish act, it's a cowardly act, if only you were more resilient. No. The reality of it is, if you are struggling with suicidal thoughts, I'm pretty sure everybody in this room at one point or another has stopped and said, you know, I'm losing hope. And you've probably had the fleeting thoughts of, well, you know, what would happen if I wasn't here? Would anybody even notice? And that's where this kind of starts. And the problem is that when you don't have a strong support system, or you don't have a lot of self-confidence or self-worth, and you're constantly getting beaten down, you start to really take that in. And so what happens is those thoughts become more and more persistent, and they become very intrusive. And then you start to believe them. And so those thoughts start turning into other things. In some cases, in my case, it turned into self-harm. And unfortunately, the chosen self-harm that I use was not socially acceptable. I didn't get into drugs. I didn't get into alcohol. If I had, I guarantee you, it would have been a lot easier for me to find help than when turning to cutting. It's not something that I'm proud of, but it's also not something I'm ashamed of. And so what ends up happening is you keep fighting this battle in your mind, and you've got this constant nagging voice in the back of your head telling you you're worthless, when you're not good enough. People would be better off without you. Why would they want you around? And so you find yourself standing at the edge of a precipice, and you are fighting every natural instinct you have to stay alive, because every living creature wants to stay alive. That is just a part of being alive. And the problem is that you're sitting there and you don't see any way out. You don't want to die, but you're tired. You're tired of fighting. You're tired of feeling like a burden. You really believe in your mind that the people around you are going to be better off if you're not there. Yeah, it might hurt them for a little while, but more than likely they're just going to be really angry, and they're going to finally be like, you know what, I'm glad they're gone. And unfortunately, every time you get to that precipice and you are able to walk over that chasm gets smaller and smaller. And every time you find yourself there, you up the ante because you don't want to go back there. You want it to be done. And then if you're really lucky, you find people in your life who start to put in roadblocks, and they create these obstacles, and they're really annoying, and they start like not leaving you alone when they realize that you're struggling. And they walk this path with you, and sometimes they realize it before you even realize it, that you are ready to end your own life. And they sit there and stay with you, even when you're beating on them and telling them, go away. They won't do it. They will walk with you down the sidewalk and are very stubborn about not letting you push them into traffic. Yes, Larry, I'm talking about you. But because I have these safeguards in place, it's been almost 2 years now, the last time that I was seriously ready to end my own life. And Jennifer and Larry actually knew before I knew. Like, I knew it was coming, but I didn't know, and they refused to leave me alone. And that saved my life. So that's what I want people to understand. That in your mind, you truly believe you are doing what's best for everybody else. You truly believe that people will be better off without you. And it's not about being more resilient, because you've been fighting forever and you're fighting a battle that never ends. It's exhausting. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, Heather, I think as I heard you talking, and just if somebody, because I've heard that, Larry, I mean, you hear everything as a pastor, the good and the bad, but I tend to think, you know, my response to somebody that way might be, hey, I don't think they're selfish. There's a fine line, there's a big difference between consumed with self and then also just alone. And I think if I can, trying to help that a person who's maybe coming at me with that term or saying that, you know, I might even ask them, like, why do you think that? Because I'm a pastor, that's my job. You know, like, well, why do you think that? Because you're standing in front of me, and sometimes it's a defensive thing because they're hurt and they're trying to rationalize or whatever in their mind. Sometimes it's a callous thing. Other times, it's really helping them understand a lot of what Heather just said and going, there are a lot of lies that are being believed. And so in the midst of lies about self, lies about the world, lies about hope or lack of hope, being a voice of truth and helping that person come alongside, being able to turn to them. And then I think, too, in the same way that we would look at somebody who, you know, you take a flotation device to save a drowning person because they will grab you and you'll go down too. That's how much they want to live. And so understanding that you wouldn't look at a drowning person and go, I can't believe they're so selfish because of the way that they're responding to somebody, helping them see maybe the critical nature of that moment.
And, you know, Heather, what you said, you know, thank you for sharing your story with that, because you know, I've seen that quite a bit, where it's just like, well, what are the options? You know, like I feel alone. But I've also seen a lot of other things as well, right? So there's the way where it's like, this is something I wrestle with often. Other people, it's like, they just have a very impulsive nature, right? And then so, they're not trying to be selfish. Something happens that agitates them deeply, whether it's in the mind, whether it's emotions, whether it's their situation. And they do it very quickly because that's the type of person that they might be, right? So, sometimes it's very thought out, sometimes it's very rash, sometimes it's, things that get going. But I think the question, what would I say? I think is, what would I say to the person that would call someone selfish? I would educate them a little bit about kind of a human nature thing, that when something's very scary, what we do is we criticize it. And by criticizing it, we've made ourselves higher than it, and then we made it to where, couldn't happen to me, right? Couldn't happen to, my people, or, it's kind of a blaming thing to protect from the big scary, right? It's, like we see it in our culture and other things, sexual assault. Well, blah, 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 and then we say something about the person that was assaulted. And it's because you're scared, and then so if you make statements saying, I'm different than you in some way, then it's a very toxic way to try to make yourself feel better about what's going on around you and fear. So that's what I would say is like, hey, let's take a look at it. So I might ask them why they think that. A lot of times probably more social media people saying that because I think don't say that type of thing, but yeah, I probably wouldn't. I don't know why I said that. I hear what you're hearing too. So, but I would talk to them a little bit about hey, this is probably the sentiment of where that might be coming from, and then see where the conversation goes from there.
Awesome.
Oh, and I have the other place.
Okay, where?
All right. Thank you, Stephanie, for sending it. So for the teens, we send them to Embark Behavioral Health. That's the one for 18 and lower. We've had good results with. And for the above, we usually send them to Southern Life Oaks Wellness. They're both maybe 20, 30 minutes east of here.
Is Embark outpatient or inpatient or both?
Those other three that I was telling you, so they do the intensive outpatient, they do the other stuff, and they do really cool stuff too. That's why I like them. They build a community around it. That's one of the things that I really see that's the most helpful is when you're not alone, someone's gonna stay with you. So they build a community around it, and I was like, shoot, I just want to come hang out with y'all because they go to Six Flags and things like that after the fact. So we've had good results thus far.
Awesome. Well, I think you guys are hearing. So when you talk about this discussion, we heard Heather's story, and Jennifer and I walked a long time with Heather through a lot of things. And I know her story is not unique, but in some ways it is unique. But there are other sides to that story. And we don't know. That's why it's so important to have people like Heather on this panel. It's why she has a passion to do this, because she wants to share the perspective of somebody that's walking on that precipice. And hers may be different than somebody else's, but they all come to that place. Some are a little bit more snappy and just more impulsive and just do it. And others have plans and know exactly what they're going to do. Yes.
The act is impulsive, but it's not, oh darn, I'm having a bad day, I think I'll go swallow a handful of pills. And that's a dangerous thing too, because it's not just one thing that causes you to get there. It's a lot of little things that build up over time. So yes, the act itself is often very impulsive. It's also the reason why 9 out of 10 times if someone has a plan, if you can get that means away from them, they're like, well, wait a minute, I don't know what to do. Because it is very impulsive and they have to know exactly what they're going to do. But suicide is not impulsive. And that's one of the things that bothers me is the whole idea of attention-seeking behavior. The night before my last attempt, I reached out to the local mental health crisis center. I was not in a good headspace. I could not physically speak. The first gentleman came out, didn't know me. He recognized something was wrong, was trying to get me to talk to him. And I was trying to, but I couldn't. When I get really upset, I stutter, like painfully stutter. One of his coworkers came out and we make water and oil look compatible. And she took one look at me and told her coworker to go inside, turned to me and said, "Go home. We don't have time to play games with you tonight. If you don't leave, I'm going to call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." This was a community mental health crisis center. I went home that night. The next morning, I took a bottle of pills, and I am very fortunate that I am still here to tell you this. So if someone tells you that they're experiencing suicidal thoughts, take them seriously. It doesn't matter if it's the first time, if it's the millionth time, take it seriously. And recognize that yes, it is very impulsive, but it's also not impulsive.
That's going to lead to where I'd like the conversation to go, and I'm not doing these in order, Heather.
I noticed.
She gave me something, but I don't read well. So I think in light of what we've talked about here so far, what are some warning signs that we can look for somebody that is struggling? And I have my own story in this, but I want to hear from you guys. What are we looking for? And, how can we identify somebody that's maybe going through a difficult time, maybe struggling in those areas?
Real quick before we get into it, there's some handy dandy cards on the back table. They fit in your wallet and they have a list of warning signs. There is plenty for everyone in this room to take one. Please do. It also has the national crisis line on there.
Cool. Now back to the question, what are some things that we can look for? What are some of those warning signs that somebody may be struggling or coming down that road?
A few classic ones would be a major change in their mood, from what you're used to, but then there'll be a change, you noticed it. It can go both ways. So I've seen people change to where they're usually distraught and all of a sudden they seem different, like lighter, but then you start to look at some of the other behaviors with it, perhaps they're giving away things that are important to them. So there's something with the resolution of, I've made a decision, right? So someone says, I'm going to counseling. Their mood changes a little bit because they're like, I'm doing something. So once they decide, then you all of a sudden might see, of course, the classic things, they're down, they're isolating, they're using substances, like check their situations, like warning signs. Always look at the situations. A major loss is going to be a big precipitator, whether it's money, which is like identity for some, a job, that kind of thing. Your relationship that's most important to you. So you look for those things, and then if you start to see those, then the warning signs are there. And here's the good thing with the warning sign, you cannot implant the thought of suicide in someone's head. So you can just ask them directly, and you can be very just, warm and comforting, but it's not an offensive question. It's just like, hey, you're telling me about the, the pain that you're in, you decided that you're going to give this away. I don't understand your plan. Is harming yourself, is killing yourself something that you're thinking about right now? And then most often, especially if you're compassionate, they'll tell you the truth because they're like she said, I don't want to die, but I don't know what to do. So you can ask them when you start seeing, some of those signs, and you're curious. And you're not going to have someone say, I hadn't thought about that, but thank you for that idea. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people I've talked to is like, I don't want to ask them that because I don't want to push them. But if you do it, it's usually hey, come here if you're thinking about it. And everyone that I've asked, to my knowledge, is usually very appreciative of that question because it helps them to know, because sometimes they're trying to figure it out too, and they're like, I don't know. And then so when they start talking about, what would they do? So that might be another question. I might be getting ahead of myself, but if you see those signs, you can ask.
I would also add, if sometimes we tend to think about previous for suicide as pulling away, but if you've not received a text from someone in a while, like, maybe it's just because I'm a pastor, but sometimes if you get a message, it's like, hey, ... or someone who has not reached out to me in a while, who I might know has a history of struggling with depression or just in general with their mental health. If I get a text from them going, I just want to say hey, or how's it going? Sometimes that's I don't want to, they might be thinking I don't want to bother you, but they also might be going, I don't want to be alone and I need some help. And so being able to interact, don't ignore those. They're often, there's something behind that. And then I'd ask you if this is right or not, but for us, for what I look for as a pastor, especially in people in our congregation, anybody who's self-managing their medication on or off again, that's a pretty classic sign of at least needing a discussion with somebody beyond themselves, but also just a heightened awareness of what's happening in their life and what's going on.
I think mine's a little different because in retrospect, I can kind of look at the two people. And with my brother specifically, it was the happiest, go-luckiest, funniest, greatest guy. And then all of a sudden, he was just like shut out. Like, he wasn't returning phone calls, he wasn't returning texts. We were in the middle of a huge project that my brother and my sister and I were all working together, and he wouldn't show up, and it was like very uncharacteristic. And to say that I feel kind of incredibly guilty for not seeing it would be the biggest understatement I've ever made. And I would say that Christians was the exact same way. It was, very structured, very all together, and then not returning phone calls, not returning texts. And then, selfishly, I looked at it, I was like, they know I need to do this. Like, why aren't they getting back to me? And when in reality, it's made me go, oh, well, just try a little harder maybe next time. Or just, if you notice a huge change in their patterns, I think that's really it, is those big pattern changes. So, because we never know what somebody's going through.
And, just to say a little bit with that guilt, it's really hard to see, after the fact, you can always put stuff together, but like, how many people don't return our checks sometimes? How many people, so it's like we just kind of get used to some of those things. It's really hard to see. And even more so, sometimes even if we see it, there's no guarantee. We always think there's a guarantee if I would have just been different. And that's a trauma response, because anytime in trauma, we're like, well, if I just would have left, it's everything from, like my brother. I've lost my brother to the combat veterans. If I would have just went left, if I would have just did. And the truth is, a lot of the times, there's things beyond, and even if they're in treatment, even if they're in that, I've know personally of stories that people got to the right treatment and they have fought their way out and they did what they wanted to do. And then so it's hard, but it's so much more difficult to catch, intervene, and all that. If you it's hard to be in someone's head. It's really hard to know. So I just want to give you that, like, from a counselor, even for me, very, there's a lot going on to it, whether they're clients or family. It's like, oh, there was that much going on there. Right? So if you can, just take that into consideration.
So what I will tell you is that a lot of times people think that you see the stupid memes on Facebook and Instagram go out all the time. If you're struggling, I don't care what time of day it is, you can come over in a tuxedo or your pajamas and I'll have a fresh pot of coffee. That's a lot of crap. And the reality of it is that a lot of times when you get to that place, the thought of reaching out for help is too much. So if in your gut you haven't heard from somebody in a while and you're not sure, reach out to them. It's not gonna hurt. But also recognize that it's not your fault. One that nobody has mentioned, and I don't think that people always recognize, if someone starts telling you that they love you. A lot of time, if it's just out of characteristic. Also, if you notice that someone is really struggling and then all of a sudden they become very calm, once you've made the decision, there's a peace that comes with it. And it's scary looking back on it, how, because you're like, okay, well now I know what I'm gonna do. I know that this is going to end. I'm gonna be okay, but I don't wanna hurt anybody, so I'm gonna reach out and I'm gonna say goodbye without saying goodbye because I don't want anybody to stop me. And this is where relationship comes in. I'm really gonna have a conversation with God about the 2.0 because this whole connection and community thing really kind of sucks sometimes.
But we've heard a bunch of things with this, and I'm glad you said what you did, Brandon, about, hey, it's, even if you would have, we can look at all the warning signs, we can sit there and have all those conversations, but there's no guarantee that we can stop and look. As a pastor, sometimes you wear that pressure, David, you probably see it even as a counselor, you feel that pressure of like, well, if I don't handle this correctly, what happens next? And what ifs will kill you. And people in my church know I hate what ifs because they don't ever end well.
What if they end well?
Thank you.
Sorry, I got it.
It wasn't me.
This was a former friend of, no, I'm just kidding, Brandon. No, with all of this, there's one thing I want you to hear because we've done this a few times. Relationship connection. And the one thing I want to take the pressure off everybody is you don't have to have answers. You just have to simply sit your butt down and say nothing.
Larry, close your ears because you can't hear this.
Okay.
You should say something nice about him. He said.
Oh, yeah. Well, if she doesn't, that's going to be disappointing. You better say something nice.
So there's this pastor that I know who often talks about the story of Job and how his friends were really great until they opened their mouth. And sometimes the greatest thing that you can give somebody will cost you more than anything, but it won't cost you a penny. It's your time. Time is the one thing we can never get back. And when you give somebody your time, you show them that they have value, that they have worth. And just that small little piece of value and worth can mean more to the person than you will ever know. And sometimes just so I was talking to somebody the other day about this. It may have even been yesterday, I don't know, I've lost track of time. But there are really 3 things that every person needs. First, you have to have your basic needs met. The whole food, clothing, shelter, safety. And if you don't have those things met, nothing else is going to matter because that's all you're going to be able to focus on is meeting your basic human needs. Your next human need is one that is really annoying to me, and that's the sense of community and belonging. Because we are pack creatures. Even the most introverted introvert still needs to feel connection to other people. And when you don't have that connection, when you don't feel like you belong, even if you have your basic needs met, there's this emptiness and this worthlessness. And so when you're spending your time with somebody, you don't even have to say anything. Just like throw a stress ball at Larry, it feels great.
His head isn't stressful.
And then once you are
Got me
able...
stress ball. Oh. You put a stress ball in here.
Yes, I did. You're lucky I don't have mine.
And she did throw it at me, by the way.
But once you have that connection and you have the people in your life that are pouring into you, you have to have a purpose. You have to have a feeling of like, okay, why am I here? But if you don't have those basic needs met and you don't have that connection to other people, you can never figure out what your purpose is. And if you don't have those three things, your life is going to feel empty and it's going to feel really hard to make it through, especially for people like myself that are living with mental health issues, who are living on the spectrum, and connections are really difficult because reading people is next to impossible. I had a therapist who was really amazing, and she was trying to teach me how to read people, and there was one test, and you look at a pair of eyes, and the eyes had 4 words, and I was supposed to pick the right word, and I picked aggressive. The right word was flirtatious.
I mean, there's nuances.
So connecting to people is really hard for me. And yet I recognize the importance of that. And if you're going to flirt with me, please tell me so that I know you're not going to beat me up.
Throat chop. I'll piggyback real quick on that. Connections. You know, Harvard or Yale, I think it was Harvard, longitudinal study, what they found is the quality of your connections, your relationships, was going to be the biggest predictor on your longevity. It's going to be the biggest predictor on your quality of life, the biggest predictor on how well you handle emotional and physical pain, the quality of your connections, right? So now let's take that, and you know, we're talking about suicide, we're talking about mental health. You know, the stigma stuff, you know, kind of goes down in a sense because people are like, oh, it's uncool to call people, you know, insert your word like crazy or whatever that could be offensive. They're kind of like understanding that, like, okay, maybe I shouldn't make fun of race or sexuality. So they're getting that as a whole, but guess what? They're still making fun of the thing that you're struggling with. And what I see is there's tends to be, you know, certain ones, right? You know, so like if it's depression, well, if you were just not so lazy, right? So now you're already thinking about it, and then you know, people are calling you lazy, right? With anxiety, you know, people call you mean because really you're just overwhelmed, so you get a tone, right? So you get all these people calling you mean. You know, like with PTSD or ADHD, it can go all the different ways, but you know, they're probably calling you immoral, right? Because you know, with the PTSD, you're trying to cope, so you're drinking, oh, you're immoral. With ADHD, you're seeking dopamine. Half of the dopamine comes with traps, right? That's the feel-good neurotransmitter. You can get it from exercise, or you can get it from cocaine, right? So if you don't choose correctly, then everyone is, you know, now telling you you're immoral, right? So if you have all these narratives, and not just from, you know, the world, we're talking family. I'm not talking Facebook here. I'm talking like the people in your house, the people at your church, the people at your job, the people that you do life with are the people criticizing you for the mental health thing that you have, right? So that's why we got to be so careful with what we're saying and our words and our demeanors, because, you know, like you're probably hitting on that button just thinking of something. And here's the cool thing, a lot of times when you sit down with people and say, hey, I know this feels like laziness, but what it really is like, let me show you a brain with depression and how that works. Oh, okay, that's not laziness. Like there's this crushing weight, right? It's not selfishness. They need dopamine and they feel like a major depressive disorder when they don't get it. No, they have trauma. They're trying to get their anxiety down. They're trying to calm. So once you can educate people, like, here's what's actually going, it's like, they're not just a bad person. Like, no, they got stuff going on. So I should stop calling them a bad person. Be helpful, right? And then they do that. Like, once they have the understanding of what's going on, that's where the narrative starts to change with education of like, I'm dealing with this. I'm not just trying to not do this thing that's, you know, like, because, you know, mental health causes relationship difficulty. I can say that because I got my own mental health stuff, so I see it from the inside, I see it from when I teach, of like, okay, like it's going to cause this difficulty, but if we're aware of it, and the people, our support network is aware of it, then our relationships get better, and then it's easier to like have more willingness to live, because it's not like, oh, I can't figure it out by myself. It's like, oh, well, you know, maybe they can help me figure it out, or maybe they can sit with me when I can't figure it out. And that just sitting with me while I can't figure it out is just like, it takes the pressure off, just enough to be like, maybe I can figure it out tomorrow. So.
It's not a willingness or unwillingness, though. I just want to clarify that.
Which part?
You said a willingness to live. It's not that you're not willing to live when you get to that place. Is that you really are just, you're tired. You're tired of fighting. You don't see any hope. you don't see any other real options out there. So it's not that you're not willing to live, it's that you don't see any way to live. Words that matter.
And to go a little bit further into it, so at the practice, we use something called CAMS, it's like a collaborative system for it. And we try to scale, and I don't know if that's the exact word in there, but like kind of like, how willing are you to live? How willing are you to die? Or is it more like a likelihood? It might even be like, what is your likelihood? But it actually scales it, and that's one way that I've got accustomed to asking people is by scaling it on like a 0 to 10, so you really see where they are. So it's not like, I don't know, it's like, well, I'm on a 9 on like how likely I think I am to do that, and I'm at a 2 on how likely I am, how willing I am to try to live if I'm tired, right? So I got to look at the language of it, because language is one of those shifting things. So I feel you on it. That's just how we try to get to it. So that might be a error in word. I'm not sure. I got to go back into it.
All right. Well, we only got about 10, 15 minutes left in the discussion. So if you hadn't wrote something down, you want to write something down, make sure Jennifer gets it and we'll get that question in. I'm going to hit on something else. And we've talked a lot about community, talked a lot about, and I'll say this, not all your friends are the right friends. I say that to teenagers all the time. You got to be careful who you let into that circle, the right people to sit with you, to encourage you. Now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This is going to hit on something because I know it registers with Heather. It is on my list of questions. Some of you here may be familiar with the term on the spectrum. It's usually related to autism. There's been different levels. You've got high functioning to, having almost all their needs met by somebody else. You've got a broad range. A lot of people that are on the spectrum who struggle with mental health issues have a hard time getting the help that they need. Heather's already shared with some of her story because when she gets overwhelmed, she has tics. And she is on the spectrum. She has tics that come up and she becomes nonverbal. And so we got some resources to help her out with that have really helped over the last 3 or 4 years in those high stress situations, like even getting pulled over, because you may have turned in front of a police officer or whatever. Those become very high stress situations. So how do we help people that are struggling, that are on the spectrum, get the help that they need, or how can we better help them as friends and family members to work through some of those things? Because the autistic mind does process things differently. They look at things differently, incredibly intelligent, but also process that differently. So how can we help them, or do you guys have anything to speak into that?
I'm always a big fan of getting your treatment from someone that has the expertise in whatever it is that you're dealing with, right? So it's like, if I've got anxiety, I want someone who really understands anxiety, not just like a little bit. So if I, with autism, right? Let's get someone that understands autism. Let's get someone that understands whatever your neurodivergence might be. Versus trying to go it with someone that doesn't, because then, they might miss things, they might misunderstand things, there might be some nuances that they miss out on, and those can be some major things. So always just give it someone that's competent to do that. Easy way to do it, if you don't have someone to refer you, psychologytoday.com, you put in your demographics, you put in whatever, and then so if you want to click autism, right? Now it populates people that at least say, I've studied this, right? So if you go to mine, I don't have a lot of training and background. I have friends and family, but no official training background. So I don't put that on mine, and hopefully they're doing the same thing as well, so that you can get to someone who understands you.
Okay. You need a card?
No, I need to go.
Larry, I want to say something.
Sure, go ahead.
I think I take a completely different approach to all of it because I'm a little bit of a idealist, let's just say that. I think that as a society and as a community, we've got to change. And we need to start teaching in our schools and teaching in our churches and our communities and whatnot. We need to teach a lot more empathic listening. And we need to teach a lot more curiosity and a lot less judgment. And we can only do that by demonstrating that in our homes and our families and requiring that of our leaders and our communities. And by doing that and being open, then we can maybe, hopefully, make changes where we can, I'm never gonna fix autism. I'm never gonna fix Asperger's. I'm never gonna fix, no, you're not broken. You're not broken. Yeah,
I'm never gonna have kids, but it's still gonna need to be fixed.
you're amazing. You are amazing. And Heather's right, like, time is it. And Larry's right. You gotta check your tribe and adjust accordingly. And create a small community around you, and then maybe it flowers from there, and then it flowers from there, and it flowers from there. And when we encounter someone who is struggling, then maybe we can be a little more passionate for them.
We got two different sides of the spectrum, which is perfect. Because yes, you're right. When you're seeking help, you need to get the right people in the room that are trained to do that. The other side of that is changing the conversation in our homes and with our kids. Because you go back to when I was a kid, and even you take my parents' generation, well, even Jennifer's parents' generation, her grandfather had epilepsy, but they wouldn't tell anybody. You pushed that stuff aside because that was weakness. You didn't tell anybody that you had that. And that's our generation was the ones that would call people retards and would make fun of people like that and do that. What we see is a generation that's open to having the conversation and getting the right terminology and understanding that people have different issues and different things, and they're not necessarily bad things. They're just different. And so the conversation is good. So I think you look at both sides of that spectrum, and that's where we need to be.
Like the professional and the personal.
Yeah.
Personal warmth and professional competency.
Yeah.
I am going to say something about this because I have struggled a lot finding a therapist. If you don't have money, it's next to impossible to find somebody who's competent. And while psychology today is a useful tool, they lie.
Yes.
That is true.
I
what I was saying.
had 3
At least
therapists
they're saying they do it, you know.
in 2020 and 2021. I had a total of 3 therapists. All of them stated that they had experience working with people on the spectrum. The first one was openly abusive and admitted to being abusive. The second one wanted to convince me that I was transgender and homosexual, not that there's anything wrong with either. I'm not. And she would not let that go. And then our last session, she was looking up a new counselor for me to see while continuing to see her. And I said no. And then the last person, her training was that she had a son she suspected was on the spectrum. That's not training, and it's not helpful. And the other thing you have to remember is even if they don't necessarily have the training, you have to find a therapist you can build a rapport with, somebody that's going to listen to you, who's going to recognize, hey, this is how you communicate, let's try to figure out a way to work together. I had a really amazing therapist who flat out told me she was not trained to work with people on the spectrum. And yet she's the one who helped me realize that not everybody's trying to beat me up. Occasionally they're flirting.
So there's a lot here. And this goes back to even the question that we have coming in, how does a person get help from a specialist if they don't know that's the issue or what that issue is, especially like if they don't know that that's what they need help with. And it does go back to, and I'll let you guys talk to it, but it does go back to rapport. Man, not everybody's going to connect with every counselor. But man, when they do, it's a beautiful thing. But how does somebody, when they don't know what that issue is, get the help that they need?
Well, just because typically, as a pastor, I wish someone was here from first responders, because we tend to be the first lily pad on their jump to something else. Most of the people coming in to our counseling or saying, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" Even if they're not somebody in my church, it's like, "Well, you're a pastor. I've never cared about that before, but at least that's a title or a thing." And so we talk a lot about in pastoral in our profession. To your point, the best thing that you can know is know what you don't know, and know when you're outside your depth in that. And so, in the same way that you're asking, how would I know where to go if I don't know what I have? It's the same thing health-wise. You start at a primary care physician or urgent care. They begin to discuss with you, and hopefully, they don't. When you walk in, they don't say, "Well, we're going to cut off your leg." You go, "Well, that seems a little extreme, right?" So, I'm always trying to listen, hear where they're at, see where I can help, but also part of that is just being educated myself, but also going, "Hey, where is this not a, I don't feel well, or I've got a couple just common questions, and where is it more of a, like, I need a specialist, I need somebody else?" And they may not be saying, "I need a specialist," but the person you're talking to, I think should. I think that's it. Finding a good place to start. Don't stop there, and don't stay there. And if they are worth what they're doing, they're going to help you at least understand what they know, but then they also should tell you what they don't know and point you in a better direction. I don't know if that helps at all, but that's where we're starting.
I think one thing that everybody in this room can do to help is normalize going to see a therapist or a counselor, even if it's Brandon. Because
See, I've been around too long now. I've been around too long.
But if we normalize it, like if I, ram my head into a wall and end up with another concussion, I know I can go to Dr. Taylor because it's okay to seek out help. Or if the asthma is flaring up, it's okay to seek out medical help. I'm not going to get shunned for that. I'm not going to get shamed for that. I'm not going to be told there's nothing wrong with me. And thankfully, she doesn't ask me if I'm suicidal as I'm hacking up a lung like some of the other, not the doctors have done to me in the past. But if we can normalize that, if we can normalize hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and get our kids into therapy, because quite frankly, our world is screwed up, and everybody probably over the age of 6, Stephanie, you can tell me if it's younger, could benefit from going and seeing a therapist, learning about emotions, learning about how to better communicate, because it got me this way, we all suck at communicating. Some of us are just better at acknowledging and recognizing it.
Awesome.
Do you want me to weigh in on that one from the...
If you want, we're hitting close to the time, so go for it.
All right, real quick. Most of my clients, they don't know what it is that they're struggling with. And then as they're talking about it and we're going through and we're doing some assessments, and sometimes it might be like, "Hey, let's do some assessments. You know what? You're really scoring high here. Let me ask questions, DSM." And then you tell them, "You know what? It's really sounding like this." And then you're talking it through, and a lot of times it's a light bulb moment of just like, "That's what I've been dealing with," and you're giving them the playbook to the thing that's been ailing them. So oftentimes you're letting them know, maybe for the first time. Now some come and say, "I think I got this. What do you think?" And then other times, scratching my head, and that's where we send them to like there's all kinds of diagnosticians. I just stuttered that out. But like we'll send them to a neuropsychologist to do assessments so that they can give us a 27-page report. And then you skip to the end and it says, "Hey, here's what I'm considering it could be based on this, 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 and this." And it's based on tests that are compared with all these other thousands of tests. And then, like your profile of that test will look a lot like someone else's profile. So with a degree of confidence, that's how you can tell what is in the world is it that I'm actually dealing with. Is this PTSD? Is this anxiety? Is this OCD? Is this Tourette's? Is this autism? Is this ADHD? to 90 and up, right? And that's kind of how we go about doing it.
So BuzzFeed is not.
It's Dr. Google.
You know, it might get you going. I'm like, let me Google some things, right? Or like,
I just watch YouTube videos. I don't know. If I know I got a counseling session, I just watch YouTube and then go in and say, well, yeah, this is what I, no, I'm just kidding. No, all of this. No, we're gonna leave it all alone. We're gonna go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I think it comes back to one thing. It really matters who you have on your team. One of the things that we really try to do, and you guys have all mentioned it, is know our depth, know our limits. People, we've got doctors, we've got counselors, even in chiropractic, people come to you and you build a rapport and they look to you and they trust you. And sometimes it's easy for us to think, hey, we can fix it, when it's really not our lane to fix. And that's why we know people. I know several counselors that I refer to people to. Got Dr. Taylor in the room. The medical side has been wonders. One of the biggest things in helping Heather, and because we can speak to this, is we have amazing people on her team. We walked with her for a really long time, all the time looking for people to add to the team. And that's what's important. And it just takes some people walking with somebody and not trying to fix things, but walking with them. And when you have the misses and the failures, it's discouraging. You say, okay, well, let's keep moving forward. Let's find that right person. It's really that time. Any last thoughts? And look, we didn't have Lieutenant Polycarpio. There is 988, which is a crisis line for mental health, specifically suicide, that's out there. It's different than 911. I know, Heather, you've looked into it. Have you ever looked into it? It goes directly to
988 will, if you are in the state of Georgia, will connect you directly to GCAL instead of a police officer coming out, hopefully, because that does still happen, even if you call GCAL. Hopefully they will send a trained counselor, or if they do send police officers, they will send officers that have mental health training. And I really wish Lieutenant Polycarpio was here, because one of the things I respect highly about Chief Westenberger is that he has made sure that his people are trained. I flat out told Larry, if I'm gonna have a crisis, make sure it's in Kennesaw.
Yeah. Well, and I'm lead chaplain for the Kennesaw Police Department. I've been on a lot of those calls. I'm going to tell you from the first responder side, I've been on the force for 9 years now, I think it is. Their first job is to protect a situation. Unfortunately, especially with somebody with Asperger's or somebody that's having a crisis, that's a very aggressive act, because they use commands. And if somebody's not responsive or somebody fights back, that ends up in handcuffs in a police car or on the ground. And they're trained to do that until they have had the training like they've had here in Kennesaw, where they see the signs of somebody that's in a mental health crisis, and they have a different protocol on how to do that.
I actually found out something very cool a couple months ago at the National Night Out. If you are someone like myself that has special needs, I hate that term, but you can actually call Central Dispatch and give them information that they will keep on file and will only be shared with the responders that are responding to you. So things like, don't put the sirens on. This person has autism, they may not respond to you. Don't come at them aggressively, because they will freak out and it will escalate the situation. I have had more than one situation where things got escalated to a point where they did not need to be because of a lack of communication.
Yeah, that's why she carries a card with her that says, this is what my needs are, these are what my, and it's a really helpful thing. Any last comments so we can be mindful of everybody's time? Anything else you guys? Yeah, that's her card. One of the officers, not on the force with Kennesaw anymore, but helped her design that she can use even when she's doing 5Ks, so that first responders know, hey, give her space and she'll be able to calm down, things like that. Anything else?
I would just say, just be curious, not judgmental.
Okay. Guys? Anything?
Maybe this was already covered last year, but Jeff,
Well, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes. Actually, more of a statement. First of all, I sat on a panel like you guys 2 days ago on mental health
There,
therapy.
do this so we can get it on recording.
So I appreciate it. What I wanted to say to you is if you're ever wondering if the things that you're doing are having an impact, please know that they are. And there's a monk by the name of Thomas Merton who once said, to paraphrase his prayer, I don't know if what I'm doing is pleasing to God, but I think the mere fact that I'm trying to please him is pleasing. So what you guys are doing is really great. The second thing with regard to relationships is there's an old expression that people are in our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And oftentimes we have problems when we try to put somebody into a lifetime position when they're really only supposed to be there for a reason or a season. So it's all right to let people go sometimes if you need to do that. And the third thing is, and again, this is going to seem self-serving, and I promise you that it's not. I'm not trying to sell books, but last Thanksgiving I attempted suicide, and I was like a modern-day George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life. I had the greatest life ever, but a series of circumstances took place, and I wasn't prepared for it. So afterwards, and part of my healing, I wrote a book called Second Wind, Stories of Hope, and it's 50 stories of amazing people who at one point attempted suicide but were unsuccessful and went on to have amazing lives. And many of them we know. We know stories of people who actually died by suicide, but these are stories of people who lived. And so there's stories of hope in there. And in the end, they're resources that you're looking for. Resources are a whole listing of national resources as well as international resources. And this book, it was published on September 2nd, and within 3 days it was #1 on Amazon in 3 categories, and I sold 10,000 books. So it's not about the money. The money that I make from the book, I give back to charities that work on LGBTQ issues and suicide prevention. And so I'd like to make contact with each of you to try and see ways we could work together. Thank you for sharing. Yes.
I work with for a peer center in Augusta. I work for the Peer Recovery Investment Center of Augusta, and I wanted to make sure that y'all are aware that the Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network has a warm line that you can call 24 hours a day. There are occasions where sometimes people don't ask up. It is not answered. It is not a crisis line, but it is a warm line. If you just need somebody to talk to, you can call that 24 hours a day, and it's
The phone number is on the resource list in the program. There are national and local NAMIs on there. There's a couple of websites on there as well. There's also a chat line for those annoying teenagers who apparently don't know how to speak on the phone. Yes, Kate.
I didn't get that. All right, so thank you guys for being here today. We've got everybody's bios, and we've got some artists that are here that have shared their art. Heather, do you want to say anything about that and close us out today?
We will be here for a little while longer. Please take the time to look at the artwork, and as soon as we are done, I will open the curtains. There's more artwork back there. There are snacks back there. There's water, there's coffee. There are things on the table over there. Please take this stuff so I don't have to take it home. And please, our artists are here. If you're an artist, raise your hand. Please talk to them and ask them about their art. These are all people that, like myself, have used art as a way to help their mental health. So take the time to look at it, talk to people, ask questions of them.
All right. All right, thank you. Thank you, panelists, for doing this. We could talk all night. This is an important discussion. Keep having the discussion. Keep being curious. I love that. And have a great night. Enjoy the art.